Lovely to have you all here in the flesh.
Hi, I'm Ashlyn McGee from The Conversation, and this is our daily news conference.
Basically, there are only about 4 experts in the country that actually model how much it costs to raise a child.
This is where our experienced team of journalists pitches ideas about what's going on in the world, the latest research developments, or stories that just help you make sense of breaking news. We then hit the phones and keyboards, commissioning academic experts to share their knowledge in stories that are free to read and free to republish. Please consider becoming a monthly donor and support our work. Go to the link in our show notes, donate.theconversation.com, and support a healthier democracy.
From The Conversation, this is Politics with Michelle Grattan.
The Greens have had a year of significant setbacks. The election result was bad. They lost 3 of their 4 House of Representatives seats, including that of their leader, Adam Bandt. Then, one of their senators defected to Labor. But at least the year is finishing on an up note for the party, with the Greens doing the deal that enabled Labor's legislation for major reform of the nation's environment regime to pass. The chief Greens negotiator for that deal was veteran Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, who was elected nearly 2 decades ago. Not only does Hanson-Young hold the shadow environment portfolio, but she's also spokeswoman on communications. So the end of this year is turning out to be a really busy one for her. She joins us today. Sarah Hanson-Young, let's start on communications. This week, the ban on under-16s having social media accounts will take force. The Greens have been highly critical of the move. Why is that?
Look, I understand that parents are desperate to find a way of helping regulate the amount of screen time their kids are spending online, that, you know, we know that many of these social media apps and other online apps are not safe spaces. And parents have been desperate for some type of support and action. But what I'm worried about, Michelle, is that this ban, like many other kind of blunt instruments, isn't necessarily going to make the online world safer for everybody at all. Kicking young people out of social media for those that it actually is able to restrict, that helps parents in that way. But I'm actually really worried that there's going to be a lot of kids who fall through the cracks, will find their way back onto social media or find themselves into other online spaces that are even darker and more dangerous. And I think what we really need to be doing is pushing these big tech companies to provide safe platforms for everybody and to ensure that we hit them where their business model is. And one of the key things that we should be doing and can do if the government wanted to would be to allow users, young people in particular, to opt out of those dangerous algorithms. So the technology that pushes dangerous and harmful content in front of them, even when they haven't searched for it, they haven't looked for it, they haven't wanted it. If you could turn those algorithms off for young people in particular, that would be a huge step forward to making people safer. And I also think social media and online big tech companies shouldn't be able to target their advertising to anybody under the age of 18. Minors should be protected from the harvesting of their data that then allows these companies to target them with such insidious advertising. Paid posts, algorithms, that's things the government could do that makes these spaces safer for everybody, but actually puts the pressure back on the companies because that's where they make their money. And if we want to protect kids, we've got to stop these companies being able to exploit them.
But given that we're such a small part of the market, what influence could we realistically have with the tech companies?
Look, it's always going to be a battle because how these companies are structured financially, their business operations. A lot of the companies get away with skirting around our laws because they offshore everything. If they're forced to onshore, if you're going to make billions of dollars in advertising online in Australia, you have to onshore some of your business, pay tax, and stick by the rules. And that's how you make legal enforcement happen.
We are seeing a number of countries now following this lead, putting in place, planning a social media ban for young people. Given your criticisms, why do you think that's happening?
Look, I think social media companies the world round know that they're losing their social license, and governments around the world are struggling to work out how to deal with this. Communities are struggling to work out how to deal with it, but they are losing their social license. Long gone is this idea that social media companies and online and the internet is just, open source and free for everybody to use. They've become the biggest advertising companies in the world. They take your data and sell it off. Nothing actually comes for free. And I think the community is waking up to that. And you see young people in particular who know they need to live in an online world. They need to know how this technology works. It's how so much of their life, our life, everyone's life is now informed and done is online. But they have a right to be safe, and they have a right to not be targeted, whether it's dangerous content or insidious advertising. And I think young people want governments to take a bigger responsibility. They just want they want it to be real, though. And I think part of the problem with this ban has been it's almost like a fake promise. It's a fake silver bullet. It's not going to solve the problem. It possibly we're going to end up with kids in more unsafe spaces, and we've got to do better than that.
So how do you think this is all going to look, say, in a year's time?
In a year's time, I think, look, I have very little hope that the ban as it is right now is going to make young people safer. I think parents are going to be frustrated over the next few months that it's not the silver bullet that it's been promised to be. We know when the UK introduced some types of similar but not the same age restrictions, there was a huge spike in the advertising and take-up of VPNs, for example. And all these people who were selling VPNs made a lot of money off selling them because that's how young people were and others were getting around the technology. So I think we'll see quite a bit of fallout of that. But I really want the government to do more here. And, the ban takes place this week. The next thing the government should do, and they should announce it this week, that they're going to regulate algorithms, they're going to regulate the advertising of these big companies, and they're going to put in place a legislated, legal duty of care on these companies. If you had all those things working in sync, we'd be in a much better situation.
Now, I just want to go back to the environmental negotiations on the legislation that the Greens enabled to pass very recently. It seems like last month's story, but it's a very live issue, a very important reform. You were the Greens' chief negotiator on this. How do you compare the negotiations this year with Murray Watt, the new minister, and those last year, which came to nothing in the end under Tanya Plibersek?
The fight for better environment laws that actually protect nature and not just make things easier for business and industry and those big polluting companies has been a long fight. I've been in this for a long time, and I know so many people activists and environmental experts have been pushing hard on this for many, many years. But there were some key differences in the way this recent negotiation and ultimately successful negotiation was carried out as in comparison to last year. I think it's really true and clear that the Prime Minister did not want the Greens doing a deal at all with the government last year. The Prime Minister spiked the deal. There was it wasn't going to happen. He wasn't keen to pick a fight with the big polluting companies, whether that's the fossil fuel companies, the miners or the loggers. So he really, made sure that could not happen, and I saw that firsthand. This time round, I think there's been huge pressure on the government to deliver something in this space. But of course, they wanted the deal done with the coalition. And we saw that when the legislation was first tabled. It was written in such a way that they thought the coalition, maybe they'd have some tweaks, but I think, it seems pretty clear to me that the government thought that the coalition would just have to suck this up because business wanted it. The big industry players wanted it. And the big industry players and the big companies certainly didn't want the government doing the deal with the Greens. But of course, the community did, because the community actually want proper environmental reforms. And so I think there was that tension between what big business wanted and what the community wanted. And I couldn't have gone in there and negotiated hard the way we did without knowing that we had the community behind us. And that was the real difference, I think, that there was a desperation from Australians. They can see what's going on. Our environment is in huge decline. And whether we're talking about, the protection of our rivers and streams and clean water or clean air, people wanting to save our native bushland and our native forests. I mean, Australians are sick and tired of story after story about nature being destroyed for profit. And they were behind the Greens in getting this deal done. I must say, Michelle, this was one of the toughest negotiations I've had in my political career. It took a long time. And not once did I think we had it in the can until right at the end when, when the deal was finalised right before it passed the Senate. There was a lot of back and forth. But, it's that you got to know when to hold them, when to fold them and when to get the deal done. And I made the decision along with my parliamentary colleagues that getting an outcome that protected Australian bushland, that new protections for native forests, to restrictions on land clearing, and stopping fossil fuel companies being fast-tracked and getting their mines approved within 30 days. These were all important things that we couldn't let pass us by, and we needed to do. So, we threw everything at it.
How did you find Watt as a negotiator?
Look, I think he was a very straight negotiator. I think he's a very personable person. But of course, he came into this just wanting to have a fix, a political fix, to get this, to get the deal done. And he would have, he obviously thought the deal would be easier to do with the coalition than with us, because that's what business wanted, that's what the corporations wanted, that's what the fossil fuel industry wanted. But over time, with us standing strong and being prepared to fight for what we wanted, but also give important ground that helped the government be able to do the deal with us, he was pragmatic about that too. So he's a tough negotiator, but at the end of the day, his job was to get it done. My job was to get an outcome for the environment, and we were able to make it work.
You had voted for a Senate inquiry that would have reported next year. What made you abandon that position?
It really came down to knowing when to get the deal done, to be perfectly honest, Michelle. I think the fossil fuel companies and big business were so desperate to stop the Greens getting our hands on this legislation. The logging industry was getting very nervous because of the changes we were making to put in pushing for more protections for native forests, that I made the judgment call that if I could get good things out of this, if we could get genuine reform for the environment and stop the fossil fuel companies getting a cheaper and easier ride, then getting that done this side of Christmas was important. I think, let's be honest, the Albanese government has shown little ambition to take on the vested interest. They're not doing it when it comes to the gambling industry. They're not doing it when it comes to cracking down on those big wealthy property developers in terms of the capital gains tax and the unfair tax advantages that property developers get. And they didn't do it last time when we pushed them. The Albanese government and the Prime Minister caved to the interests of the big business. And I wasn't prepared to hand industry and business the opportunity to do that again.
Let's turn to some more general political questions as we end the year. Annika Wells is in bad trouble over expenses, entitlements, even though she's acted formally within the rules. Do you think there's a case for tightening up politicians' entitlements?
Look, I think there's always it's a hard area because you need to be able to do this job well. You need to spend almost all of your time doing it, and the community expects that. You know, the community is they want politicians that work hard, say what they do, and do what they say. And if you want to be good at this this role, it is 24/7, 7 days a week, 52 weeks of the year. It is. It is that type of. It's not really a job. It's a vocation. It is service. And so there's a balance because I think, you know, in order to be able to do it well, you do need access to resources, and we want our politicians to be able to be well informed and to be able to make good decisions. What I don't think has been handled very well by Annika Wells is, you know, you do need to acknowledge that there is a privilege that comes with this position. And with that privilege, particularly at a time when regular people in the community are finding it really tough, cost of living is, you know, really crippling to people, particularly at this time of year. You've got to be a bit more sensitive to that and a bit more eyes wide open to that. And I just don't think the ministers really understood how it looks to the community. I think, you know, those flights to New York for, you know, barely a day just didn't seem really worth it. And I assume that if you ask the minister now, and, you know, the privacy behind the you know, without the cameras, I would assume that she would probably accept that now. But at the time, you know, she obviously wasn't given the right advice, I don't think. You've got to be able to justify these things. And if you can't feel that you can justify it, then you probably shouldn't do it.
Now, earlier today, Barnaby Joyce has announced at last that he's joining One Nation. He's going to be the One Nation lead candidate for New South Wales in the Senate at the next election. Recent polling has shown the Greens are now behind One Nation in their polling, and they lost seats. Obviously, you lost seats at the last federal election. What do you attribute One Nation's support to and the Greens not able to maintain their position, at least in terms of seats? I know their vote didn't go down much, but in terms of seats.
Yeah, look, I think this is a really interesting dynamic because one of the things out of all of this is obviously we lost those 3 lower house seats, including our leader's seat, and that really knocks your confidence around. It really does. But I think in the midst of all of this and in the desperation of our political opponents, some within the media commentary, desperate to kind of dance on the grave of Adam Bandt's loss of that seat and our other colleagues, I think that it masked the fact that actually we had a near record high of Green vote across the country and that the depth and breadth of that vote is very strong. And of course, in South Australia, we had a record high in the election. I had the highest vote I've ever had. The South Australian Greens did better in all seats than we've ever done. Like it across the state, we did exceedingly well. But one of the things we did actually, Michelle, in the midst of the election in South Australia was I was very worried about the rise of One Nation, and I took them on. And I was very clear about this in the election campaign, and we beat them off. South Australia was the most likely seat that they were going to pick up at the election, and they didn't. The Greens got a record high instead, and they barely rated a mention. But what I do think happens with One Nation, and this is what, you know, the South Australian example is key to this, I think. One Nation consistently and continually underperform at election time and under-deliver. And when people really see what they're about, when people tune in come election time, when there's the spotlight on them, actually Australians aren't up for that. Now, there's, of course, some within the community who are liking some of the things that One Nation is saying, but it is by far smaller than what the current polls are showing, I believe, because as soon as they're under any real magnifying glass, people recoil from it and they're not interested in it. And even then, when they do get in, they underperform. We've seen that look at Mark Latham in New South Wales, look at what's happened every time Pauline Hanson's tried to recruit a new person to her party. It never lasts long. I mean, I don't know how long the Barnaby Joyce and Pauline Hanson union's going to last, but it reminds me of kind of what happens over in Trump land. They're friends until they're not, and it doesn't seem to last very long. But of course, we can't be complacent about it either. We have to be clear with voters about, as politicians and political parties, what we stand for, what we want. Are we listening to the struggles and the concerns that people in the community have? And of course, One Nation's a one-trick pony. They blame immigration and migrants for everything, take no responsibility, don't really hold the big corporations accountable. And I think at the end of the day, when people look at it, really what they stand for, they don't like it. And I've no doubt that that'll happen again. But you do have to take them on, and you have to force that spotlight on them. We did that in South Australia at the last election, and I think all of us need to keep doing that across the country. It's not about ignoring them, it's about exposing them. And that's what needs to happen. I'll just say one other thing, though, in terms of polling. Well, I thought this is a really interesting point. There was that Red Bridge poll last week that had, and it was quite a news article about, One Nation's votes in amongst men in the Gen X category had increased. But actually, when you look at that poll, what is the standout number and figure in that poll is that 37% of Generation Z women are voting Green. 37%. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And today in South Australia, ahead of the South Australian election, poll results are showing that in 18 to 34-year-olds in South Australia, across both men and women, young people, we're at 27%. And the Liberal Party are at 10. So I think we do have a breadth and depth of support within the community. We definitely had our confidence knocked around at the election. But I would say, and this, the recent environment law reform negotiations, getting that done, having the backing of the community, getting $50 million extra for the ABC, the Greens are back. We've got our confidence back and we're feeling really good.
Just before we leave One Nation, I should note that, in fact, they did double their Senate representation at the last election. And I wonder, what do you think about Barnaby Joyce's ability to pull votes in New South Wales?
Yeah, well, he's obviously, a character and he's known. But I must say, I find Barnaby is pretty tired these days. I mean, the idea that he's joined One Nation, is teaming up with Pauline Hanson, who the only thing she seems to do really is, wear the burqa into the chamber. She can't even come up with a new stunt. I'm not sure really how that's going to go with the broader community. I think at the end of the day, they continue to underperform, and even if they do get elected, they underdeliver, and people can see that.
Now, in recent years, I think it's true to say that the Greens have become more factionalised than they used to be. They've moved into issues that are well beyond their original environmental base. I know this has been a gradual thing, but we did see it particularly in the last term. Do you think that the sort of strategy and the sort of face, or multiple faces perhaps, that the Greens presented last term will be what we'll see through this term?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with the comment about more factionalised or moving away, to be honest. I think what's happened is, as we have grown, and we've grown significantly. I mean, when I first got elected in 2007, there was 5 of us, and now we've got a huge, we've got 10 in the party room. We've had multiple members in the House of Reps, and we're a serious political party, of course. If it means that if you can pick up seats, it also means you can lose them, and that's so we did that. That happened. We had to cop the brunt of that in the election in May. And as I said before, it knocked our confidence. Of course it did. Losing your leader is a big thing. But because of the breadth and depth of our support that has grown consistently over the last 2 decades, we've got a very solid base. And because of that, we're expected, just like every other serious political party, to participate in debates across the board and to be a representatives for the community on the things that matter to them. And of course, environment's always going to be front and centre and important. We are the Greens, of course. And we understand that the biggest drivers of inequality in terms of things like the way the housing system is structured, that people are just locked out because of, the wealthy property developers, all of that gets exacerbated under the climate crisis. The climate crisis is going to hit the disadvantaged communities harder and harder and harder. And, I think we all know that you can't disconnect the environment and climate from all the other issues that people are dealing with. But those other issues, cost of living, the cost of housing, the feeling that people have that corporations are running the show and not the interests of the people. People feel that in a really deep way because it is true and it's happening to them all the time. And we have to engage with that. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's that we're a serious political party. And, I said when we negotiated the deal on the environment laws, with the Liberal Party and the Coalition are an absolute rabble. And they're worse than a rabble. They are eating themselves and tearing themselves down. They don't know what they stand for. But I tell you what, they don't stand for the community, and they certainly don't stand for future generations. And it comes to things like climate or environment and the impact that is going to have on the next generations. So they're a rabble. And I said at the time when we did this deal that the Greens actually are showing that we're the adults in the room, that we can negotiate and get outcomes when needed, but we also are able to hold the government to account and take them on. And I think people want us to be able to do both. And I think that's why we're the true opposition, actually. While the Coalition are in total disarray, the Greens are getting in there. We can hold them to account and we can negotiate and get outcomes at the same time. And that's the strength of a party that is not siloed, but indeed has that breadth and depth. And I think that's where we are. And I reckon, as I said, we've got our confidence back. The Greens are back, and I'm really looking forward to 2026. I think it's going to be a very good year for us.
Well, you have a state election coming up in your home state imminently. How do you think the Greens will go in the South Australian election?
I'm very hopeful. Of course, you never take these things for granted. Current polling is showing us higher than we've ever been in SA in terms of the state polling, so that is good. But it's going to come down to the seat by seat battle, where the toxic algal bloom has been devastating on South Australia, and we've really led the charge on that. Again, just the basics of looking at what happens when you don't care for the environment and you don't care for the climate. And the toxic algal bloom is driven by the fact that the oceans are warming. There's been a marine heat wave, and that's allowed this toxic bloom to grow. It's devastated parts of the state's economy, the tourism economy and industry, the fishing industry, but it's actually regular everyday people that are copping the brunt of it. The idea that you can't go swimming at the beach some days because the water is actually unsafe to swim in is a devastating realisation to the community of where we've got to with the state of the environment. And the Greens have really led the charge on that, and we will continue to hold the government to account, both federal and state. And I think that puts us in good stead for the state election. The Liberal Party there are obvious, again, like it seems everywhere else in the country, just totally lost their way, don't know who they are, infighting, rolling of leaders, leaking against each other, and are failing to be an opposition. And it's the Greens who are the true opposition. And I think voters, I'm hoping, and that voters will recognise and want to work with us to make us, put us in a much stronger position. The seat of Hanson in South Australia is the Adelaide Hills. It's just near where I live, and that's a key seat for us. And our candidate is Genevieve. She's a young woman, a young mum, runs the kinder club there, engaged with her local community, and she's getting a really, really good amount of support in the local community. So that's the seat to watch if you're keen on the South Australian election.
Just a couple of things before we finish up. Been around, as you say, for nearly 2 decades now in federal politics. In 2009, you were asked to remove your 2-year-old daughter from the Senate floor. In this year's election, she voted for the first time. What do you think has been the biggest change in politics since then that you've seen, and how do you think you've changed since then?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's not an easy question, Michelle. That's a huge question. But I mean, Cora is, she's now at university, she's studying, and she was so proud to go and vote at this election, just incredibly just chuffed with herself. And I was very chuffed as well. It was a really important milestone for the two of us. And I think the biggest change really is just how many more women we have in the parliament now. When I first got elected, there were very few, and there were certainly very few with as young mums. And that has changed. It has changed dramatically. There is more, obviously, young women from all parties now in the parliament, and the dynamic then has it does change the dynamic in the building and in the chamber, and it does mean that there are issues that are discussed in and given a higher platform that perhaps wouldn't if it was just left up to the blokes. And I think women also bring a different. And this is a generalization, of course, but I think women are very good negotiators. And I think because we do that, in so many other parts of our life, it's about wanting to try and get results that helps everybody. A little bit of listening here, a little bit of taking on board what that person's saying, being clear about what it is that you want and you need. I actually think the more women, particularly, of course, I'm in the Senate, the more women we have in the Senate, the better the Senate is able to get outcomes on difficult issues. And there's a whole new group of younger women who have come in at this last election, and I think we're going to see the effects of that roll out over the next, 2 or 3 terms, I reckon.
Although when you tune into the Senate, it does look a bit wild and woolly at times.
Well, there's obviously the characters, and there's obviously those who really want to use the Senate as a kind of a platform for their narrow casting sometimes. But I guess what I'm saying is I think the new generation of women that are coming through the ranks, I have faith that they're going to make the place better. And I've seen the change already, and it's going to keep getting better, I think.
And how have you changed?
Look, I think I've always been a truth teller, Michelle. I've always thought, if I'm going to do this job, I want to be able to speak up for people who don't have the opportunities to do that themselves. And whether it's on human rights issues, on issues of gender equality, on young people, on environment, I've always wanted to make sure that I could call it as it is. But I think I've become a better listener, and therefore a better negotiator and a better representative over the years. And I must say I'm enjoying it more than I've ever enjoyed it. And I just I think I can. Yes, that politics can be so disillusional and disillusionating to people, that people just feel, whether you're in there or outside watching, you're just like, what is going on? How is this representing me? I think those of us who are there have a responsibility to keep breaking down those barriers, to make politics accessible, to make sure that what people are really feeling is being heard. But to do that, you've really got to be able to listen and listen beyond just your regular perception and narrow casting, I think, is a danger for politics. And I think we all have to make sure we don't narrow cast too much, and that we're really listening clearly and with intent. And I think I've become better and better at that.
And just finally, you'll have a little bit of time off over Christmas, New Year. What's on your bedside table to read?
Well, you wouldn't be surprised to know that I'm keen to get into Jacinda Ardern's new book, of course, a different kind of power. I haven't read it yet. I know a lot of people have and just love it, and so I'm keen to get into that. But I'm also I'm a bit of a tragic when it comes to the kind of soppy romance and cringe thriller. So I'm keen to try this new book by Rebecca Armitage, Tasmanian author, The Heir Apparent. So I'll have a bit of serious and a bit of fun.
Sounds a good mixture. Sarah Hanson-Young, thank you very much for being with us today. That's all for this podcast. Thank you to my producer, Ben Roper. We'll be back with another interview soon, but goodbye for now.
Production by Ben Roper. Theme music by Lee Rosevere. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organisation. Sign up to our daily newsletter for evidence-based news and analysis, including articles from Michelle Grattan, or listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
An autocrat loves a crisis. A crisis is the way that they mobilize their base.
While America is under invasion from within, we're under invasion from within.
He's testing the boundaries of what he can get away with.
We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
We've asked 6 of the world's preeminent scholars how we can measure the make of an autocrat. It's a recipe of sorts, tried and tested by the most infamous leaders in history.
Hugo Chavez in Venezuela.
Vladimir Putin in Russia.
Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler.
Viktor Orban in Hungary.
He's basically bulletproof in terms of criminal prosecution.
Join us from December 29 as we explore Trump, the making of an autocrat, from The Conversation.